can't see me, but I am here. So you all look great. My understanding is that you folks won't be speaking during this event. You'll just be present with us via Zoom, which is great. I don't know if you can see in your camera angle, but we have you up on a TV. For everyone participating, we would appreciate it if you could refrain from using the chat function, just because it pops up on our screen and then it'll go out on the feed, which is not optimal. There's one extra person in here, Shayna. She's just our cart captioner, so don't worry about her. She doesn't come up on screen with you guys. So if you all wanted to turn your video on, try to front light your face. Most of you are looking pretty good. Do you have any questions for us?
We're all good.
Well, thank you so much for being here with us.
Good morning and thank you for joining us. My name is Tina Thibault and I will be your moderator for today's briefing on the work of the Nova Scotia Economic Growth Council. I'd first like to introduce the Premier of the Province of Nova Scotia, the Honourable Iain Rankin, and the Chair of the Nova Scotia Economic Growth Council, the Honourable Scott Brison. Additionally, we have members of the Council joining us virtually this morning. Annette Verschuren, Chief Terry Paul, Rod Badcock, Jen Prisk, Javin McDonald, Matthew Martel, Lise Dupre, Jolene Mahody, and Jennifer Wagner. Go ahead, Premier.
Thank you, Tina. Hi, everyone. I just want to begin by acknowledging that we are on Mi'kma'ki, the traditional ancestral territory of the Mi'kmaq people. And if I can just start with a short video, to set the scene today. And thanks to everyone involved in putting such a great video together. I think you can see from it what a vibrant, busy, and innovative place we already are here in Nova Scotia. And the Economic Growth Council will ensure that we are even more so. On April 7th of this year, I announced the creation of the Economic Growth Council. 10 distinguished Nova Scotians from diverse backgrounds who represent many sectors, regions, and perspectives make up this council. When I made a call to each of these esteemed and experienced business leaders, each of them accepted my invitation to be a resource to me and the government to weigh in on policy options and to provide advice and actionable ideas to grow the economy as we emerge from the pandemic, with the recognition that growth be sustainable and inclusive. I also asked the group to build on the comprehensive reports our government has commissioned in the past, but that is not the focus on producing another report. Instead, I asked they focus on actions the government could immediately take to build on our strengths, to innovate, and to establish our incredible province as Canada's startup and scale-up capital. When I first met with the Council, I reminded them that during the pandemic, government implemented policies that under normal circumstances may have taken us much longer to advance. For example, at the onset of the pandemic, we moved swiftly to position our healthcare system to provide virtual care. We waived fees for businesses and conducted virtual inspections, something we may not have considered in the past. This is to say that the pandemic forced government to think and do things differently, and I challenged the Council to do the same thing. And they rose to the challenge. Within a month of its creation, the Council, chaired by Scott Brison, delivered its first set of recommendations to government. And as requested, the actions are bold and ambitious, but are also practical. They also reflect the imperative that growth must be inclusive and sustainable. And all can begin to be implemented immediately. I've accepted those recommendations with gratitude and enthusiasm. The recommendations fall within the following themes, which Scott will walk through shortly. The themes are reopening, startup, scale-up support, reducing international trade barriers, government service, housing as a strategic sector, and regulatory governance and burden reduction. I'm pleased to report that 2 of the Council's recommendations relating to the reopening of the economy have fully been implemented. I'm equally pleased to outline that we will begin implementation on all those others with one exception. There's one recommendation which we will defer for now, and that is the moratorium on all new regulations during the recovery period, with some exceptions for inclusivity and sustainability, health and safety. While I understand the rationale for the recommendation, a moratorium on new regulations could inadvertently slow the reform agenda. For example, there are regulatory additions that may be requested by business. Further regulatory additions are often required to enable business to operate in new ways, such as providing documentation to government electronically. Given this, I would like additional time and information to better understand whether and how we could implement. I am confident that acting to immediately implement all of the recommendations will focus our province on the things that are important for continued growth as we come out of the pandemic. And I'll now ask Scott to walk through the recommendations.
Thank you, Premier. Thank you for the opportunity to contribute to the growth of Nova Scotia. I want to thank our council members as well. Some of them have been mentioned earlier, but Chief Terry Paul, Lise Dupre, Jen Prisk, Jennifer Wagner, Jolene Mahody, Rod Babcock, and Matt Martell, Fred Crooks, Jevon McDonald, Annette Verschuren, and more recently Rob Niven. This is a great group of Nova Scotians who understand business, who understand community, who understand diversity, inclusion, and sustainability, and who feel passionately about the future of our province and are excited about the opportunity to contribute to it. As the Premier said, he asked us to do something different in this case compared to previous approaches to economic development. He didn't want a report from us because we already have excellent reports. The Ivan E. Bragg report, the One Nova Scotia report, these are really strong foundations for our work, but they've also been important to a lot of the changes, positive changes we've seen in Nova Scotia over the last decade in areas of immigration, in areas of innovation. These previous reports have really helped move the needle in a significant way in helping turn our province around. In fact, recommendation 4 of the One Nova Scotia report on new business startups is one area where we have underperformed as a province. And that's why the work of this council is focusing on startups and scale-ups. It actually flows from recommendation 4 of One Nova Scotia. Now, the focus of our council is quite simple in terms of our objective is to make Nova Scotia the best place in Canada to do a startup or a scale-up of a business. We believe we can become one of the best places in North America and in certain sectors, including clean tech, perhaps the best in the world. Now, when people talk about startups, usually they're referring to technology-driven startups, and that could be in clean tech, biotech, ag tech, or digital tech. But it could also mean a restaurant. It could mean an experiential tourism operation. So we believe that the things you do to make it easier to start up a restaurant in a part of Nova Scotia may also contribute to making it easier to start up a digital company or a clean tech company. Now, the Premier wanted and told us at our first meeting he wanted specific actionable items. And we were able to provide him with a set of recommendations within several weeks. We did that because he said he wanted them by the end of May. He wanted us to get underway and to produce actionable items that he could get behind as Premier and drive change within his government. We focused, because of that quite aggressive deadline he had when he put us to work, we focused, if you will, on low-hanging fruit, on opportunities that were available to us for early deliverables. And the ideas, particularly in the first group, focus on two main types of ideas. One are smart things we should do more of. The second are dumb things we should probably stop doing or do less of that make it tough to do business. Gee whiz. It's been a while since I've done a press conference where I had to shut off my phone. Sorry about that. We work to identify common sense ideas that are laser focused on making it easier to do business in Nova Scotia, to create jobs and growth and opportunities for our people today and for the people we hope to come to Nova Scotia, to become Nova Scotians, to help grow our province. Many of the ideas actually have come from the business community. We presented 16 recommendations to the Premier in late May, and the Premier, as he said, has accepted and is moving forward as a government with 15 of them. Some of you familiar with the operations of government can recognize that this is warp speed under normal circumstances for a Premier and a government to take action on growth opportunities and policy changes. On the reopening side, I want to briefly go over each of the recommendations to provide some context. On reopening, as the Premier said, our council worked with him and helped provide recommendations which provided increased clarity to the staged reopening process. We interacted with business community and we heard them, and we made these recommendations, and the Premier and of course Public Health, Dr. Strang and his team moved forward with a reopening plan, and we were able to help contribute to it, particularly on clarity and on streamlining the approach. Secondly, on the limiting of certain fees, we heard from the restaurant industry and from restaurant owners that during COVID, when they were fighting for survival, that delivery fees on the delivery services in some cases were usurious and onerous and considered almost exploitative in some cases. So moving to limit those fees was a recommendation from the restaurant industry and from restaurant owners. We did that or made that recommendation, and the Premier and government moved quickly on that. Now, in terms of startup and scale-up business support, the next recommendation is a game changer. It is to waive all regulatory fees for new businesses for the first 2 years, prioritizing businesses that incorporate ESG into their business plans from the start, a focus on both sustainability and inclusion. That condition, by the way, is one of prioritization, and it's intended to encourage small businesses from the get-go to think about ESG, because today that's a really important part of what investors in public and private markets look for, is an understanding of ESG. It could mean that when you're starting up a restaurant, for instance, that you consider the very important social and economic issue of food waste and perhaps partner with Feed Nova Scotia. It could mean, again, if you're starting up a restaurant, that you use spent cooking oil as part of a biofuels project. So there are opportunities, and we intend on having certainly flexibility, but we want to be able to work with individual businesses to help provide guidance and help them grow sustainable, successful businesses. We also want to take a one-stop shopping approach to permitting in Nova Scotia, working in partnership with other levels of government, in many cases, most cases municipal governments, but in some cases federal governments, to help streamline the regulatory permitting process in Nova Scotia. We've heard from business leaders and business people from a range of sectors who have told us that poorly designed, opaque regulatory processes that are not accountable to them as stakeholders have created, and this is not unique to Nova Scotia, governments writ large have created a burden and a barrier to growth. So by streamlining regulatory permitting processes and working with municipalities, and in some cases the federal government, we want to see applicants treated as clients, not irritants. Service standards, which will instill and require from public servants responsiveness to applicants. And the incenting of people involved in the maintenance and enforcement of regulations to approve, to extend permits, and to get things moving, to actually find ways to encourage them to look at the applicants as clients as opposed to a nuisance. And identifying sectors that are priority ones for growth for this province, like clean tech as an example, or as the Premier said, housing as a strategic growth strategy, as areas where we intend on focusing our work to provide the Premier with more background and information and clarity on some of the opportunities to streamline regulations. On the clean tech side, I can tell you that this is an area of tremendous opportunity for Nova Scotia, and it's unacceptable that a clean tech company should have to wait almost a year for an operating permit to contribute to Canada and Nova Scotia's fight against climate change and to create good, sustainable jobs. The other area of regulatory changes is in the area of reducing internal trade barriers, interprovincial trade barriers. These are the regulatory differences in many cases that create artificial and unnecessary barriers between our economies across Canada and across Atlantic Canada. And over time, there's been a lot of talk on this. Premier Rankin, in accepting our recommendations, is prepared to actually walk the walk on reform of interprovincial trade barriers and take action as Premier in government. Number one, we recommend that the government move unilaterally as a province to bring down regulatory differences wherever possible. The first area is in recognizing the professional and occupational credentials of all other provinces and territories automatically. Secondly, we want to, and we've recommended to the Premier that the government study and evaluate but eliminate and reduce the exceptions to the Canadian Free Trade Act, the CFTA, federal and provincial initiative that has made some difference, but there are exceptions that every province have maintained. Nova Scotia currently has 17. We believe that those should be evaluated individually and reduced and eliminated to enable Nova Scotia to actually take a leadership role in the national project of building a more prosperous Canadian economy. We also want to see a reduction of the trade barriers in Atlantic Canada. Now this has been around for a long time, discussion of greater Atlantic cooperation, and there has been some progress made. However, that progress has been halting, and we believe Nova Scotia should lead, and the Premier agrees that in cases where Nova Scotia can move unilaterally to harmonize its regulatory approach with one other province or two other provinces or more, we should take that opportunity. Let's not let perfection be the enemy of the good and wait for the opportunities when all four agree. There may be some cases where Nova Scotia can agree with one other province and move the needle on a specific regulatory difference. With two other provinces, or perhaps all three of the other ones, but we should not wait. We should actually move and take action and improve business conditions where we can in the short term. Third area is in terms of government service to business. Service standards, customer service training for our public sector employees, streamlining the permitting process, and the Premier mentioned as well that during COVID, there's been a lot of progress in terms of streamlining some regulations and in terms of digital enabling of government to serve people faster and better. This is no time, as Nova Scotia recovers from COVID, to go back to how we served people before. I think there's an opportunity for us to up our game, to take advantage of the digital transformation driven by COVID, to become better at serving citizens and businesses. So I think there's actually an opportunity for us to really drive change that helps to reboot the relationship between business and government in Nova Scotia. One of the areas in terms of regulatory approaches is to move from a prescriptive approach to a performance approach in terms of regulations, where you describe to the business or the sector what you're trying to achieve and you allow them to help recommend the methodology to get there. That is very different from the prescriptive approach. The prescriptive approach to regulations is where you tell business what you want and then you tell them how they're going to do it for you. That's kind of like walking into the best bakery in your city and ordering a chocolate cake and then giving them the recipe for it, telling them exactly how you want it done. As opposed to going in and describing the chocolate cake you want to get out of the process and letting them tell you how they're going to do it. And effectively, we believe that businesses understand and share, in fact, many of the regulatory objectives that governments have, and they can contribute and help us implement and monitor and maintain a regulatory framework that works in protecting citizens' health and safety and environment, but at the same time in a way that enables business to grow and prosper. The Premier mentioned earlier housing as a strategic growth sector. We have seen in Nova Scotia, not just in recent months, but in recent years, a shift in our housing market. Some of that has been driven by our economic growth in some areas, which is a very good thing, and our population growth. I mean, premiers for about 50 years have worked hard to try to reverse population and demographic trends. Over the last decade, and under multiple premiers, we have seen a growth in immigration as an example. I mean, we can actually say on the immigration front and population growth front, this has been something that no one party did. This is something that a progressive conservative premier, John Hamm, established the Office of Immigration. Darrell Dexter, as an NDP premier, continued to focus on immigration, and Stephen McNeil, as a Liberal premier, took the baton and ran with it. But this is a multi-partisan consensus that has emerged that new people coming to our province is actually a good thing, and we all know that and understand that. Now, in recent months particularly, as we've seen the COVID impact and a shift in housing prices, I think it would be a mistake for people to blame that on the demand side fully, as opposed to looking at it holistically as a supply and demand issue. Yes, there's a lot of new people moving to and wanting to move to Nova Scotia. Yes, that can have an impact on housing pricing. But the real issue over a period of years has been supply. And there are two ways to address this issue. You can seek to reduce the number of people who want to come to Nova Scotia and establish themselves and their families and their futures here. I personally don't think that makes a lot of sense. The second way is to increase housing supply, to build more housing. Affordable housing, clearly, that is an important social and economic priority of this government. But beyond that, all kinds of housing, from multifamily residential to single family to modular, Nova Scotia has a tremendous opportunity to lead with a housing strategy. Now, what does it mean to take a look at Nova Scotia, for Nova Scotia to consider housing as a strategic growth sector? When governments declare or deem something as a strategic growth sector, that means you align the public policies around that sector to create more opportunities for growth. There are two barriers to growth in Nova Scotia housing that we've heard from people involved in housing at the front lines, not just in Halifax, but across the province. One is the permitting process, that it takes too long, and it in a lot of cases acts as an impediment to building the kinds of housing that we need as a province in our communities. And the second is the skills one. And there's been action taken on both by municipal and provincial governments working together, and most recently the immigration stream around housing trades and the cooperation with Nova Scotia Community College as an example. But we intend on focusing on some of these areas and helping provide, in partnership with the Premier and the government, ideas that help address the supply issue in Nova Scotia, partnership with the municipalities on the regulatory side to create a more streamlined approach to housing construction permitting in Nova Scotia. More predictability, more certainty, and ultimately more housing for Nova Scotians across this province. In terms of regulatory governance and burden reduction, it's an important principle of government that you can't manage what you don't measure. And the Office of Regulatory Competitiveness in Nova Scotia, led by Fred Crooks, has done a great job. Leanne Hashi and Sasha Rutledge are part of that team. Fred is on our council. They've done great work and have delivered real results for Nova Scotia. The Premier has asked that we, again, up the game, and that by the end of 2022, an additional $30 million of savings to business result from regulatory modernization. Now, some other areas of regulatory governance and burden reduction include an annual regulatory budget in the legislature, where departments include their forward-looking regulatory plans and give an opportunity for legislators and the committee process to actually vet these new regulations and these new regulatory changes, and to give an opportunity for stakeholders, including business, to contribute and to play a part in developing the best public policy. Further to that, we want to build on changes made under COVID by the government in terms of regulatory improvements, build on those, and move forward with a greater emphasis on a world-class digital platform. In terms of making it easier for departments and agencies to participate in regulatory modernization, an annual Regulatory Agility and Modernization Act will be tabled, and every department and agency will have the opportunity to contribute to that in order to make it easier for them to navigate the legislative process as they modernize and evergreen regulations. We also are recommending more flexibility on renewals and making it easier and simpler for small businesses and all businesses to work with the government of Nova Scotia. Finally, in closing, we're at a unique time in the history of our province. COVID represents a significant economic shift. Among other things, the greatest level of digitization in our history, and the amount of digitization in a year that would have taken in normal times 10 years. This is the first time in probably 100 years that a big global economic shift has occurred that is in Nova Scotia's favor. We've not always been benefited from these big shifts in the past, sometimes called industrial revolutions. But in terms of the fourth industrial revolution, Nova Scotia is very well positioned with a knowledge-based economy, value-added economy, a focus on immigration and innovation. COVID has actually turbocharged our opportunities and redefined what a jurisdiction needs to do to be successful. And this is not the time for us to rest on any laurels, because not since the age of sail has Nova Scotia had the same level of opportunities to succeed. So the Council wants to thank the Premier for his support, for his acceptance of 15 of the 16 recommendations. We appreciate his sense of urgency because we share it. This is a window of opportunity we have to strengthen our province and to reposition our province. And there's an opportunity for us to be an agile province and nimble in how we develop and implement public policy. Our council, and some of the members are with us virtually today, share that view that we want to get things done as, in fact, I think Annette Verschuren's quote is a little different from that. It was, if I can't remember correct, it may have been get stuff done or something to that effect, or it was certainly GSD. And there's a high level of GSD in our council. We want to get stuff done. We want to contribute ideas, and we're very happy that the Premier shares that passion for building a stronger, more prosperous province, and to do so now. So thank you very much.
Again, just a reminder, we'll take one question and one follow-up from reporters in the room, and then we'll go to the phone lines. We'll start with Brian Flynn from All Nova Scotia. Go ahead, Brian.
Thank you. I'd really like to have a chance to ask Mr. Brison some questions, but Premier, I've been waiting since Monday to ask you a couple questions, so I'll get to those first. Premier, you said during your COVID news conference on Monday that you were found innocent of 2005 drunk driving charges. The court record shows that a police officer testified you had alcohol in your breath and you failed a breathalyzer test at that time. The test result was deemed inadmissible because the prosecution could only produce a photocopy. I'm wondering, were you drunk on the morning of July 25th, 2005 when you rolled your car into a ditch?
So again, as I said Monday, I want to reiterate that I'm very, very sorry for my actions as someone that was very young, and it's regrettable that I have to relive that experience right now. But yes, you asked a question, and I thought it was important to tell all Nova Scotians at the same time about a charge that I have on my record. I've always been forthcoming about that charge, and then in 2005, I had something that was dismissed in court.
Yeah, it was dismissed in court, Premier, I understand that, but I'm wondering, the court record does indicate that you failed a breathalyzer test, and I'm wondering if you could address that. Had you been drinking before that accident in 2005? You had said you were innocent, and I'm trying to get to the point of whether or not you had been drinking.
Again, I'm very sorry. I was 22 at that time, and I've made some bad decisions in my life in my early 20s. I'm 38 right now, and I think that this office needs to have someone that has integrity and honesty, and I've done that. I've supported MAD since I've been in this office every year. I'll continue to work with them, and a lot of families have been impacted by drinking and driving in this province, and I will do whatever I can do working with MAD to ensure that we prevent those types of things from happening in this province.
Thanks, Brian. Next, we'll go to Mr. Hampshire from the CBC. Go ahead.
Thank you. Just picking up on that point, Premier, how is being acquitted on appeal based on what some are saying was a technicality here, the same as being found innocent?
Well, we have a court of law that determines the outcome in this province. I make no excuses for the kind of lifestyle that I lived when I was in my early 20s, and so I want to be clear about that. I regret that alcohol was a big part of my life in my early 20s, and I've moved on, and I've lived a more safe lifestyle since in my 30s. About to become a father in November, and I'm proud to be the Premier of this province, and I'll continue to do what I believe in as the principles and the lessons that I've learned in my life.
Go ahead with your follow-up.
Thank you. Looking at that second charge then, as we're discussing now, and some are suggesting that maybe you haven't been forthright enough, how truthful would you say you've been about all these facts to Nova Scotians since this came out?
I've laid out the facts on Monday about what has happened in my past, and I've always, whenever anyone asked about this, I've always said what has happened in my past, and I'm not proud of it. And we all need to look at how we improve the culture of this province, and I'll continue to do what I can while I'm in this office and as an MLA. It's a privilege, and I think you know, it's something I'm not proud of, and I'm reliving it now that it's out in the broader public. But it was certainly something known to people around me, and I'll continue to do my best and move forward, as I hope Nova Scotians can see I'm a different person.
Next, we'll go to the phone lines now. We'll go to Alicia Drouse from Global. Go ahead, Alicia.
Thank you. Premier, just want to follow up on that. You did just say in one of your answers that you know, you're based in integrity and honesty, but you still haven't answered the one question honestly if you had been drinking before that second incident in 2005 or not. So I'm just wondering if you can just come out and honestly answer that question.
So again, I'm very sorry that I lived a different lifestyle in my 20s. The court dismissed the charge because I was not guilty of driving under the influence.
Go ahead, Alicia, if you have a follow-up.
Okay, so I just wanted to go to the recommendations that were laid out in this report. Talking about the the national barriers, interprovincial barriers, both for trade and for occupational requirements. The recommendations have been accepted, but can you just clarify on what that means? Does that mean that right now, you know, a teacher who qualifies in Ontario can now come to Nova Scotia without having to get relicensed, or is that just something that's being looked at? I'm just kind of looking for some clarification on this.
So there are a number of professions that have different credentialing requirements in different provinces. Apprenticeships, for example, was one area that we've already moved to accept different training, Red Seal training from different provinces. So this follows along that same progress, and we'll be looking at all opportunities. We think we should be dismantling those unnecessary barriers when people want to move here. If they have professions, especially those that we have high demand for.
Next, we'll go to Michael McDonald from the Canadian Press. Go ahead, Michael.
Hi, sorry about that. Premier, will you commit today to releasing all disclosures made by caucus members regarding previous criminal convictions and charges, including charges for impaired driving?
So all parties have a process to vet candidates, and our party is no different. And if there are questions about candidates, that is disclosed to the party, and they have that choice whether or not to accept the candidate's disclosure. I was happy that I was accepted, and someone that made a mistake a long time ago, I was happy that the Liberal Party accepted me.
Go ahead, Michael, with your follow-up.
Last year, prior to the provincial election in Saskatchewan, the main parties there disclosed lists of candidates who had received criminal convictions. Will you commit to doing the same today?
I could certainly look at that, whether or not it's public for people running on the record. Obviously, there was a record of my past, and it was known. It's just more broadly known now, but I'll take that back as an example in one province and consider it.
Next, we'll go to Pat Healy from the Laker. Go ahead, Pat.
Hi, this question's for Scott. What was the process involved in coming up with today's recommendations?
Thank you very much, Pat. First of all, the Premier insisted and was very focused on an urgency to bring forward actionable items quickly for his government to implement. So there was a lot of work that had been done in the past in terms of recommendations from business leaders and business organizations, which actually provided fodder for us to work with, where we were able to update, modernize, improve and strengthen some of those recommendations, and incorporate them into what we brought to the Premier. The focus largely of these ones is on the regulatory side, but I think you can expect to see going forward a strategic focus on areas involving immigration and innovation, housing. The Premier has asked us to focus on housing as a strategic growth sector because, of course, housing affects all sectors and is just an underpinning of a business environment. So it was that urgency that drove the first batch of recommendations with a focus on regulatory competitiveness. And the work of the Council now will focus on some other strategic areas of growth for Nova Scotia. And there's a lot of good ideas out there for us to look at and to contribute to and strengthen.
Go ahead, Pat, with your follow-up.
This is for Premier Rankin. How will some of these recommendations announced today help or benefit the business communities and those in rural Nova Scotia during the post-pandemic recovery?
Thanks, Pat. So the idea is that these recommendations benefit the entire province. There are different sectors across the province that have been more strategic in areas if you're next to the ocean, if it's something that's like the work that's happening at Cove, if you're in a sector like forestry or agriculture that's more pronounced in rural communities. We want to dismantle regulatory burdens for them. We want to stimulate innovation in all sectors. So all of these recommendations feed into a growing economy and leveraging strategic sectors that we have in this province, growing our population, focusing on innovation. So it's about all of the sectors.
That's all the time we have for questions. Go ahead with your closing, Premier.
Thanks very much. I want to thank Scott and the work of the Council, and thank you for stepping up, Scott. You've been a champion for this province for a long time, and it's really great to have you and the varying experience that are brought. We have a sample of some of them on the screen there that have brought forward such a wealth of experience in different sectors, different backgrounds, different regions, and I really appreciate the United Vision to come out with some short-term recommendations on how we grow a more inclusive economy, more sustainable one, that looks at our opportunities as we start to rebound from this pandemic. I couldn't be more optimistic about our potential in this province, especially when you see leaders like this stepping forward. So I look forward to implementing these recommendations, moving forward with them, and accepting more of the long-term recommendations that are forthcoming in the fall, and look forward to working with you all moving forward. So thanks again.
Now there's, thank you, Premier. There's one last thing we'd like to do to signify a new approach to business and government in Nova Scotia and the rebooting of the relationship between business and government. Premier, if you will indulge me, you're going to have an opportunity to cut some red tape with some very special scissors provided by the Canadian Federation of Independent Business. These are the golden scissors, Premier, that recognize the work that Nova Scotia has done. I will actually hold the red tape.
Okay.
Well, you have the opportunity to, here we are, to do that. Let me see. Oh, my mask, of course. Here we are. Premier? There you go. Oops, I suppose I should have the red facing out, yeah. Great stuff. Great stuff. There you go. Thank you very much.
Before we end, I understand that the video didn't play well the first time, so Premier, if you'll have a seat, we'll play the video one last time for our audience at home.